This morning we're going to be reading once again from Luke, and in fact we're going to be picking up what happens right after where we read last Sunday. Now you didn't have to be here last Sunday to know. I'll tell you right quick what it was about. Jesus had the disciples come to him and they demanded something. They said, Jesus, increase our faith. They wanted more faith. And Jesus went on to tell them that if you just have this much faith, and if you can't see between my fingers, that's because that's how small he meant. If you just have this much faith, you can do anything. You can change the world. And then we learned, as we talked last Sunday, the difference between faith and its opposite word. You know, we oftentimes think faith, or total trust in God, is the opposite is doubt. And in reality, it's not doubt. The opposite of faith and trusting God is the opposite, is thinking that we know everything, trusting in ourselves. And that's called something in the Bible. That's called something in theology. It's called sin. The original sin started by Adam and Eve. So we saw the difference between what sin is, or lack of trust in God, and what faith is, total trust in God. And the reason I brought all that back up again is because this next event that happens in Jesus' life that we're going to read in Luke chapter 17, just as an event that happens, and I don't think it's by accident, because it continues to talk about this idea of living in faith or living in sin. And so I want to read this story, and you heard what it was. Many of you may not have heard this story before about the 10 lepers. But let's read it again from Luke chapter 17. If you have your Bible or a pew Bible, I invite you to turn and read this with me. But we're going to be in Luke chapter 17. I'll start reading at verse 11 and finish with verse 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Before we unpack this story, I've kind of got a theological question to ask you, and you're not going to have to actually answer, but I want you to think about this question. We're in 2016, I think we're probably a little more informed about other religions than we probably have ever been in our lives because of our world events and things that are happening. And so the question is not a new question. It's been asked for many years. But the question I ask is this. What is the one unique thing about Christianity that makes us different from all the other religions? Now, I know that we all vary in our knowledge of the faith and all that. And yeah, this is one of those theological seminary questions. But you probably have some thoughts on that. What is one belief we have that is different from all the other religions? Well, as a matter of fact, a few years ago, there was a group of scholars that got together to actually try to answer this question. And they got together, and these were people, smart people from all over the world. They came together in England, and they asked that question. Let's talk about this. What is the one thing that makes our religion, makes Christianity unique from any other religion in the world? One of them said, hey, maybe it's the incarnation. Now, you know what the incarnation is. It's the idea that God himself came down and became human and walked among us. Personified. The incarnation is to be incarnate in flesh form. And they said, well, that's true, that's unique about Jesus, but it's not totally unique, because with other religions talk about gods that come down and take human form. And if you were in middle school and took mythology, you know that that whole religion is about their gods being in human form. So that's not it. They said, well, maybe it's not incarnation, but maybe it's the resurrection. Maybe it's, the whole idea that Jesus died on the cross and came back and still lives today. They said, well, yeah, that's true, but other religions talk about how their people and their prophets and their gods have died. I mean, even Judaism, they've got, Elijah, he supposedly didn't die, and he lives forever in heaven, and, so that's not it. Then somebody said, I know what it is. It's got to be love. We have a unique way of loving people. Yeah, that must be it. And they realized, that may not be it, because, that whole golden rule thing, you treat people the way you want to be treated, that Jesus gave us. You know who said that first, don't you? In a different way. Buddha said that first. So maybe that whole idea of loving each other and mutual respect, we can't claim that either. Well, it just turns out that C.S. Lewis, you know who C.S. Lewis is, great theologian and writer, he comes into the meeting, he says, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they told him, we're trying to decide what's the most unique thing about our religion. He said, oh, that's easy. It's grace. And when he left, they all thought about it, and they said, that's it. And we know what grace is, right? Grace is the unconditional giving of love and forgiveness that God has offered to us through Jesus Christ. That's what it is. It's mercy. Total mercy. It's a commuting of our sentence, if you will. It's an idea that we no longer are going to get a life term for our sinful acts in hell. We're going to get a life term with God. And we didn't have to do anything to earn it. Because, the other religions have that kind of thing, that kind of acceptance and forgiveness, but it's all a pay-as-you-go plan. It's what you earn. If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. In the world, the universe of karma, it all comes around. What goes around comes around. And if you do this in Islam, then you can earn special places in heaven. That's not the same thing as grace. And so I wanted to start today by telling you that when the 10 lepers proclaimed and yelled out, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us, they got it. They got mercy. They got forgiveness. They got grace. They didn't earn it. They didn't do anything for it. They stood on a corner with their ailments. Now, you all know what leprosy is. I was kind of kind to the children, but it's a terrible thing. It was contagious, and there was no cure for it in the first century. And it's actually a nerve condition where the tips of your bodies begin to die off. And you know that when your fingertips die, they fall off, and people had to suffer with no fingers and pain and ulcers and bumps on their face and sores. They lost their ears, they lost their feet, and it was very contagious, and so they just, basically the communities had no answer for them, so they threw them out to be with each other, and it didn't matter where they were from or who they were. They shared in their ailment, and they lived together, and there's these 10. And that there were rules about how close you could come to civilization. But they, I think, broke the law. They're now standing on the street in the town that Jesus is passing through, and they yell out, have mercy on us. And of course, you know the story. Jesus says, I do. He doesn't say it, but the fact that he stops, he turns, he sees them. By the way, I always thought that have mercy on us, but I think I really know what it means now. It says, see us. Know who we are. Know our situation. And Jesus looked at them and had compassion on them. And he said, here's what you do. Go show the priests. Go back to church. So they run off to go show the priests. And as they travel, they realize they're healed. It says in our Bible they're made clean. And you know the story. 9 of them are excited. They're so glad they're healed that they go on and live their lives. We don't know what happens to them. But one, the 10th leper, returns to say thank you to Jesus. Now, I don't know what happened to those 9, but I was thinking about it, and I was beginning to think that maybe those 9, these might be some good excuses for them why they didn't come back. See if any of these sound familiar. okay? Because really what this story is about, we talked last week about the opposite of faith is sin. And when you have faith, you trust God. When you sin or live in sin, it's basically living a life where you don't trust God, you trust yourself. You know better. In this faith world, God knows better. And I was beginning to think about it. You know, Jesus is didn't tell us a story. This is what happened to him. But it kind of illustrates what it looks like to live in faith or live in sin. And so I thought about those 9. And here's some excuses I gave them, all right? Let me just share these with you. I figured that one of them was, they're all made healed. They all were healed. They're all made whole. One of them may have waited to see if it would last. You know, is this really going to take? You know, if it does, then I'll thank Jesus, right? I mean, but I want to make sure it's real. One may have decided that he probably never really had leprosy. Maybe that was a bad diagnosis after all. Maybe I was hanging around with the wrong people, but I'm cured now. One may have said that he would have gotten well anyway. You know, if I'd have just given it time, I'd have been okay. One gave the glory to the priests. That's where they were going to see. One said, oh well, you know, Jesus really didn't do anything. All he did was tell us to go see the priest. It's not like he did something special. And then one said, any rabbi could have done that, what Jesus did. Anybody that's in a religious life, they could have done that. One said, leprosy must not be as bad as they said it was. And one said, there's probably a natural explanation for this. And one might have said, next time I see Jesus, I'll thank him. You see, these are excuses. The 9 probably had some good ones. The 10th leper did not have an excuse. He went back to find Jesus to say thank you. You see, I think that's the key. You know, Jesus touched all 10 of them, spiritually, physically, and their lives were changed forever. That's what we call today salvation. That's what we call new life. Because when we, as human beings in our sinful nature, encounter Jesus Christ and the power of the cross, we're changed. And we have to decide how it's going to change us. Are we going to live out the life, the new life that we received through the resurrection? Or are we going to continue to live in the old life? And I think this is the story of that. Because if we're going to live out what it means to have Jesus save us, to be our Savior, to be born again, to live in new life through Christ, through the resurrection, then it means to live in the life of faith. If we're going to be saved, but continue to live the way we've always done with these kind of excuses, you know, next time I go to church, I'll thank Jesus. Oh, you know, sin's not as bad as they say. You know, really, what does it mean to be saved? What does that mean to me? I don't need your mercy. I know who I am. All these excuses go in this column under the word sin. I know better. I trust myself more than I trust God. You see, these lepers are showing us what it looks like to live in the life of faith or in the life of sin. Or as I call it, this life of faith, I call it living with an attitude of gratitude. And if you're living in the sin column, it's excuses for the uses. That's what the two are. By the way, I have a friend. Some of you may know him, and I want to give him credit. His name is Larry Holden. Anybody know Larry Holden from Coolidge? Larry Holden was the Baptist pastor in Coolidge when I was pastoring the Methodist Church. And what a great guy. He also works today as a chaplain at Hillcrest. And he's in a band. He plays the drums for a musical group. And the name of that group is the 10th Leper. You know, you wouldn't know what that means unless you know this story. And he's saying that being the 10th leper means you live in a world of faith, a world of gratitude, where you come back to Jesus and remember what he did for you. That's the life that I want to offer us today, is that if Jesus is going to save us, if we're going to accept this offer of life and resurrection and being born again, then we need to accept what it means to live a life of faith. And to live a life of faith means we live a life with an attitude of gratitude. Is that we look for where God is acting in our lives and we don't neglect to say thank you. Now, that's just part of it. The other part comes from my favorite story, and I know I've told you this story before, and I think it's worth saying again. It's the story of our friend Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. Do you remember that story? Captain Eddie Rickenbacker was a World War I flying ace, which basically means he shot down a lot of enemy planes during World War I. But during World War II, he was still in the military. And he was given a special mission to deliver a message to General Douglas MacArthur in New Guinea. And so he got on a B-17, which is one of those bigger bomber planes, with a full crew, and they set out from Pearl Harbor to New Guinea. Unfortunately, they got lost. And as they got further and further lost, they also got out of radio range. They also began to run out of gas. And they had to ditch their plane in the middle of the Pacific. And so here's Captain Eddie Rickenbacker with this B-17 crew floating in the Pacific in these rafts. Well, their rations lasted 8 days. Now they're on the 14th day. And they had no food and no drinking water. They didn't know what was going to happen. But they did know, they did a devotional, a little worship service every day out of this book. And the one day it was, I think his last name was Cherry. He was the pilot for the B-17. It was his turn to read the devotional. When they got done, everybody was kind of quiet. And so Captain Rickenbacker just pulled his hat down and began to doze off in the sun. When all of a sudden, something landed on his head. He was scared, but he didn't move because he thought it might be a bird. He looked up under the bill of his hat, and the faces of the other men told him that he was right. It was a seagull. Now, a seagull normally doesn't fly out this far in the Pacific. It was hundreds of miles from where it normally would be. But Captain Rickenbacker knew that if I could grab this seagull, it would be immediate food for us now. But we could also use his guts and his insides, all that, for fish bait. We find more fish, and then we could get, the more fish we catch, we can use it for bait, and we can survive. That seagull meant life. Well, he was able to catch that seagull, and they did eat that seagull's meat. They did use his insides for fish bait, and they managed to go over a month floating in the Pacific until they were rescued. Now, that's not the end of the story. The real part of what I wanted to tell you about this story is that until his death, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, from his home in Florida, you could always find him until he died in the 1970s, every Friday evening, carrying a bucket of shrimp along the coast, feeding the seagulls. It was his way of living an attitude of gratitude. He said, because of that one seagull's sacrifice, I will spend my life feeding other seagulls. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus sacrificed his life for our survival. And the idea of living a life of faith, an attitude of gratitude, means we are called to then feed his people. Our life needs to be a life of gratitude. Our life needs to be a life where we find out how we serve each other. Not because I want to be known as a do-gooder, but because I want to say thank you to a Jesus Christ who died for me so long ago that I could never say thank you enough. So we always do this every Sunday. Again, I want to tell the truth about what we do. This offering, this collection, isn't to get our money amount matching our budget, because that's God's job. What this is an opportunity for us to say thank you, so that the resources we collect can then be used to say thank you to the world, to the people in our lives, whether it's through Undy Sunday or an Encore collection, or whether it's our own food pantry here in town. That's how we can live an attitude of gratitude life. That's how we live in a world of faith, because that's what it means. If we're going to receive salvation from Christ, then we need to spend our lives saying thank you for it. And that means living a life of faith. That life of sin is our old life. That idea that we know better has changed because Jesus Christ knew better, and he died on a cross for us. He rose again so that we could share in that resurrection. We don't know anything about that. We don't need to. All we have to do is say, yes, I want that. I want that life. That's what life is, and that's what it means to live in faith, not in sin. There's no more time to make excuses. Our 9 leper friends did that. They were healed, but they never came back to say thank you. One was healed and spent his life saying thank you for the greatest gift ever given. I think that's our call. I think that's what it means to be a Christian. A Christian doesn't just take it and run. As Christians, as disciples of Jesus, we're called to accept that gift of new life, that gift of salvation, and then find ways every day on how to thank God for it. In other words, we're not called to be the 9. We're called to be